First of all, let me tell you that I am both honored and humbled to be associated with all of you in this room in public support of the men and women and children in Camp Ashraf. I would like to call on the political figures in my own country to take a few moments and view the video that we just witnessed. They're cowards. They're bullies. They've committed mass murder. And hopefully one of these days the broader world community will hold not only them, the individual soldiers, but their leaders accountable. I wanted to review with you just for a moment, although you probably don't need this quick history lesson to be reminded of where we are today. But I thought in terms, if I had the opportunity to speak to my president or to the United Nations or to the European Union, I might share with them some of the following remarks. The men, women, and children in Camp Ashraf, by my recollection, in May of '03, agreed to disarm. On July 2nd of 2004, the United States government assured them that they had achieved the status of protected persons under the Fourth Geneva Convention. In August of '08, General Petraeus was given assurances by the Iraqi government that once the responsibility for the protection of the residents of Camp Ashraf was turned over to them, he was assured of the Iraqi government's continued protection of those men and women. We saw, after what many believed to be a fraudulent election in '09, thousands of demonstrators taking to the streets, 40 plus being killed, over 400 being injured, and some of the videos with the sounds of gunfire in the background and cries for freedom still echo in the ears of those who watch those videos. By and large, the United States, the EU, and NATO uttered a few words of condemnation and then turned the other way. For the past couple of years, the United States, as well as other European countries, have tried to negotiate as a matter of goodwill with the Iranian government for fear that this is a country that ultimately will become nuclear. Do remind one another, I hope, from time to time in the U.S., the UN, UK, and NATO, that this government, the Iranian government, is the government that provides the greatest amount of political, military, and financial assistance to terrorists around the world. In my judgment, perhaps the greatest threat to the broader world community at this time. And as much of a threat as they are and the destabilizing influence as they are today, one can only imagine how threatening and aggressive and intimidating they would become, not only in the neighborhood and not only in the Middle East, but around the world once they were nuclear armed. These talks have gone absolutely nowhere. In 2010, the EU and the UK said that the MEK did not deserve to be listed as a terrorist organization. A court in the United States said the same thing. Over the past several months, an extraordinary number of public officials in the United States of America have finally come to realize that the democratic resistance led by an inspirational leader, Maryam Rajavi, and the thousands of men and women and children in Iran and expatriates around the world, are the truly only organized internal democratic opposition to the mullahs and the anti-democratic, anti-Western, repressive, totalitarian, theocratic state of Iran. They have encouraged the president to delist the MEK. These are very prominent individuals, ladies and gentlemen, Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, former ambassadors, two former chairmen of America's Joint Chiefs of Staff, UN ambassadors. The list goes on and on. And in spite of that, there was silence from the White House, silence from the Secretary of State. I remind you of all these facts because it seems that it's necessary to look back at history to determine how shameful and disgraceful our inattention was to the dramatic pleas and entreaties of the residents of Camp Ashraf, beginning, and their friends, as people in this room, over a month ago, appealed to the U.S., appealed to NATO, and appealed to the United Nations to provide the protection that was once guaranteed by the United States in 2004 and by the Iraqis later in 2008. And no one did anything. One can wonder what's more outrageous or unconscionable: the bullying, cowardly tactics of these mullah-led, mullah-inspired Iranian soldiers who are accompanied by Iraqi soldiers. Apparently Tehran has more influence in Baghdad than the EU, the UK, and the United States of America. What's more unconscionable? Their cowardly or brutal massacre, or our indifference to the pleas and the entreaties of the men and women and children of Camp Ashraf? So I have some questions that I think we need to ask. We need to ask them publicly. How many innocent lives are these Western countries, these democracies, prepared to sacrifice in the name of economic or diplomatic relations? Obviously, there's a great deal of economic opportunity. There are plenty of countries around the world, including Europe, who are trading with Iran. Are we fearful that we might undermine those economic relationships? We're fearful that these negotiations, these discussions that Americans and other countries are having with the Iranians will ultimately prove to be futile if we delist the MEK and provide them the protection and support that we promised them over 6 years ago. At what point in time in a country's history, in this instance among these democratic countries, do your values outweigh your interests? At what point in time, when you stand up and call for universal human rights, when you stand up and rhetorically support humanitarian causes around the world, do you follow those words with action? The time is now. The time is now.